been buying property for a long time ourselves. From the very early days, I didn't have the correct A team. You can say the same, right?
You learn.
Yeah, we live and we learn. I guess let us make the mistakes for you rather than you guys having to do the mistakes yourselves and learn the hard way, because it can be very costly. I've witnessed in so many ways people have not been able to grow wealth because they might have bought the wrong property first, and that could be a trigger of just having the wrong person in the team or overpaying for something too early or whatever it is. So many different ways it could go wrong. So we decided to create a series of videos. This topic is very important to me. We quite often have first home buyers or people who have no idea about getting into the market, but we share this to really give you that high level view on what needs to happen along the way. So today I'm joined with a very special guest. His name's Geoff. He's what we call Mr. Accountability in our business. You can rely on him on anything. He will give you the step-by-step instructions prior. He will set the expectation, tell you the timeframes that things have to be done in. Geoff, at a very high level, why should you go to a mortgage broker first?
One of the reasons why you want to go to a mortgage broker is you probably need to understand your borrowing power. So your borrowing power would sort of give you a determination of what you can look for, what type of asset that you can buy, your first home, is it a unit, is it a house? Can you afford the repayments at that level as well before you start going out searching? So it's very important to understand your budget. Some of the schemes that are available as well for first home buyers, they're quite handy. So understanding from a broker will probably give you that guidance and what you can use and what you can't use.
So step one is obviously to build your team. So the very first point of contact is your mortgage broker. We've got the whole Who is Your A Team video, so watch that if you can. But another key point is to then work out who your conveyancer or solicitor is going to be. You need that person to be able to review, give you good advice around the contract. Don't just pick anyone because your mum used a solicitor or because your cousin uses a conveyancer. Really figure out who it is that's going to pick up your call when you need them to. Property transactions happen quick, fast, and when they do happen, you really need someone to be in your court. And somebody who's done a lot of transactions, especially in the area that you're buying in. If it is particularly an investment property, you need to have a good property accountant who understands structures, taxes, what it does take in order to buy it in the correct vehicle or structure. And if you are buying an owner-occupier investor, there are buyer's agents which can help or assist in these processes. Geoff, do you have any horror stories about someone who hasn't had the correct person in their team?
Mate, there's plenty out there. I guess I think one of the teams has had is getting a basic conveyancer, just ticking off everything, getting it deal done. And there was concrete cancer in obviously the slab, didn't give them the right advice. I had one recently where, this is actually a true life story. Client literally was shopping for 6 months. This conveyancer said, don't buy all the properties that they selected for over a 6-month period. They ended up not having a good experience and end up finding a property that they wanted to buy. It was advised that this property might have Sydney water easements and certain things on the site. The client didn't take the advice from this conveyancer, end up going to a different conveyancer, end up buying the property. We still end up doing the loans for it. And that client end up doing some renovations to the site. And funny enough, next door neighbour actually works for Sydney Water. So right now that lady is actually suing the other conveyancer because they didn't give them the right advice and they bought something. So sometimes the conveyancer is telling you to not do something or giving you some advice to double check something, and you should do some due diligence and double check that. There's a reason for it.
So look, you've found your mortgage broker. Ideally, it was a strategic broker. You don't have to have a conveyancer solicitor straight away, but ideally you would have one in your court ready to go. What would we do as brokers as the next step?
So the first thing is you would apply for a pre-approval. Make sure you've got your finance in check. Once you've got that finance in check, you would literally start searching. You sort of understand the budget you've got to work towards. There's a couple of different types of pre-approval. So there's system pre-approval where you submit it to a bank. Their system says that you're pre-approved. It hasn't been vetted by actual assessor. We try to avoid those at most cases. The reason why is the systems could be wrong. They might not pick something up that the assessor could see later on. It is better to obviously submit it to a lender that actually has an assessor that picks up the file, goes through your file, checked obviously your income, your liabilities, your credit file, and then say, hey, you can borrow X amount of money. That then gives you confidence to go shopping at that level range.
How long does it take to put together a pre-approval?
Varies from lender to lender. At the moment, they're quite quick. So let's say once we've got all the correct paperwork and the application has been prepared, most bank turnaround times are probably between 1 to 5 business days at the moment.
That's provided that there's no rework on the file. So a good broker should be able to do what we call one-touch applications, which means that you submit the deal, it's virtually approved. We haven't missed a beat. A really good broker really has to understand exactly what the bank requires in order to get that approval. And if there's anything outside of their scope, we should identify that before it's put in. Generally, with a pre-approval, there are conditions on it, right, Geoff? So tell us about these conditions and how we overcome them.
Yep, so very standard. Most conditions might be things like, hey, you're willing to reduce your credit card, maybe close out a car loan, pay out the HECS, that sort of stuff could increase your borrowing power. When you buy the property, there might be a restriction on how much rental income that we need to see as a rental yield. So if we don't have that rental yield because there's an existing tenant in there and it's lower, that might change the actual borrowing amount that you're going to get from the bank.
So I think the big key condition on a pre-approval is it's always subject to valuation, because if you overpay for a property, you could be at risk, right? So I've been doing this for almost 15 years now, and I've seen people lose 10% deposits because they pay too much at auction. So, you really need a good broker to give you kind of guidance. We have a lot of access to systems like RP data, a few other things, a bit of common sense, looking at what's comparable to that property in the area to see what they've sold for. That will give you kind of a grasp of, look, am I ridiculously overpaying or am I not? If you've got a tight budget, your broker's really got to understand that, hey, you've got a tight budget. We can't afford to go beyond a certain level because you're at risk. A good broker will be able to help you eliminate most of that risk, but we can never be 100% certain at auction conditions for the valuation to come in at the same price. But in some cases, some banks, if you know what your maximum bid is, they will allow us to look at that and say, hey, if you bid up to that, there will be no issues. All right, so once you found the property, like Geoff, what do you do next?
So you'll do your due diligence. Normally you'll ask for the contract, maybe a building and pests, maybe a strata report. During this process, I invite a lot of my clients to keep me in the loop. Hey, I found a property, this is the property I'm going for. I have access to RP data. I basically normally send out a property report. I normally guide you guys through on how to read that report to then sort of give you some information on what that market's doing, what they're selling for in the local area. So then that might give you an indication of what you should make as an offer. You've then got to obviously consider what that amount would be and then consider making an offer. If we were going to auction, we'll probably have a discussion to make sure we do all our due diligence. Are we going to offer too much for this property? We just have a limit and set that towards your budget and to safeguard you. Yeah,
so if you found the property that you like, I think the next thing, if you're really serious about buying that property, you need to get a copy of the contract. The contract obviously goes to your conveyancer or solicitor and they need to review it. It needs to be reviewed to see if there's any special conditions that you want to load in there. So typically they would want a 10% deposit. So you could negotiate that down to 5%, potentially even less. A contract is fully negotiable, remember? But obviously not to that point where, you're just pulling someone's leg and they're not going to sign a contract with you because you've just asked for too much.
You got to make it attractive. Imagine if you're the seller, what would you want as a seller? The more attractive you can make it, the more likely they're going to accept it.
So your offer's been accepted or you've won at auction. So Geoff, what's the next steps after that?
There are different methods. I guess if you won at auction, you've obviously had the contract reviewed beforehand. So the next steps is to let the broker know. We would obviously then start the moving to formal process, which would be ordering a valuation in the background, getting the bank to approve it, and then starting to work out signed loan documents and getting ready for settlement. If it's a offer accepted for a sale, if you haven't already had the contract reviewed by then, you would definitely make sure the contract is fully reviewed by the solicitor. And then same thing, the broker will then obviously move to formal and do everything in the back end and guide you through those steps. The steps is pretty much going to be bank approving the loan, going to signing loan documents, and then getting ready for settlement.
All right, so you've now obviously exchanged, you've got your finance approved. What happens next?
So once they've issued loan contracts, you would obviously review them, sign them. We would obviously need to buy things like building insurance. We would obviously need to do a final inspection on the property as well, just before you obviously settle the transaction. And then pretty much on the day of settlement, you pretty much sit back, your conveyancer will do the settlement purchase for you. So they get the deal settled, let you know that the deal's been done, and then you guys can pretty much move in. If you're not moving in and it's an investment, then you would obviously start to get a tenant in there.
So really important piece after you do buy a property is on the finance side anyway. I know Geoff does this really well, is that aftercare.
Yeah. So what I tend to do is I will book in a call, probably within a week from settlement. After that, what I do is I walk the clients through of their accounts. Even though we might tell the bank to set up certain direct debit accounts or certain offset accounts, the bank do make errors. They are human, and we see it all the time. We then verify all the accounts have been set up correctly, go through what accounts where the money's coming out of, what offset account has been linked, and how to probably get ahead, and talk about things like how to get ahead using offset accounts or making extra repayments, and then talk about your future goals from there.
Look, we've covered a fair bit in this video, and I thought this would be a great way just to share the step-by-step process. I've witnessed in so many ways people have not been able to grow wealth because they might have bought the wrong property first, and that wrong property could be a trigger of just having the wrong person in the team, or just, overpaying for something too early, or whatever it is, not looking at the easements in the property. There's so many different ways it could go wrong, right? We'd like to see ourselves as a bit of the glue around this process. So we hold the fort, and we almost like to vet each of your A team members as we go through this process with you. So, it's really important that you actually start with a good broker who actually can understand all elements of the buying process, who are kind of across it. I think between Geoff and myself, we've done over 20 property transactions personally. So, we can share our, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that we've gone through in our personal experiences. So having that, I guess, that glue or the person in the center is really important.